Hello everyone, I am Ishwarya from Government Degree College for Women's Begumpet. Today I am going to deal about the topic respiration in animals. I would like to include the subtopics in this as what is respiration and the definition of respiration, and coming to the types of respiration and the respiratory structures present in different organisms, and the mammalian respiratory system and the detailed explanation of each and every respiratory organ present in the respiratory system, and coming to the structural and functional unit of respiratory system, that is alveoli, and then coming to the steps of pulmonary respiration, that is there are 5 stages. I am going to explain them in detail. In that, transport of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, and cellular respiration plays a major role. And coming into the topic, generally all the living organisms require some amount of energy to perform their living functions and to stay alive. So they require energy, and this energy is obtained when food molecules are oxidized in the presence of oxygen. So respiration is not only the exchange of gases, but when food molecules are oxidized with the oxygen which we inhale inside. So the definition of respiration comes here as the oxidation of food molecules in the presence of oxygen by the release of energy is known as respiration. This is the definition of respiration. Okay, now most of the chemical bond energy is released when food molecules are oxidized in the presence of oxygen. So respiration can be defined as a process of obtaining energy by the oxidation of food molecules. Respiration can be divided into 2 types, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. This is divided on the basis of the presence or whether the respiration is takes place in the presence of oxygen or absence of oxygen. When coming to the aerobic respiration, energy is obtained by the oxidation of food molecules in the presence of oxygen. That process is termed as aerobic respiration, and more amount of energy is released during aerobic respiration. And when energy is obtained by the oxidation of food molecules in the absence of food molecules, this process is termed as anaerobic respiration. Generally, all the living organisms obtain energy through aerobic respiration because more amount of energy is released during aerobic respiration. Now coming to the respiratory organs present in different organisms, all the living organisms require respiration in order to perform their living activities and to stay alive. So they require some energy. In order to obtain energy, they need to respire. So in different animals, different respiratory organs are present. Coming to the invertebrates, most of the invertebrates are unicellular organisms, and they have a unicellular structure. So they continue the process of exchange of gases by a process called diffusion. When coming to the earthworm, it carries respiration through its moist skin. It is also called as cutaneous respiration. And when coming to prawns, gills are the respiratory structures present in the prawn. Here we can see the gills. These are the gills present in the prawn. And when coming to cockroach have a very well defined system, that is the tracheal system, where respiration or exchange of gases takes place. This is a respiratory system in cockroach. When coming to the vertebrates include the first formed vertebrates are the fishes. In fishes, gills are the primary respiratory organs present where exchange of gases takes place. And then coming to the reptiles, amphibians and mammals, there is a evolutionary change in the respiratory organs. Initially we have seen fishes have a gills, and from then reptiles and amphibians, mammals have a well developed alveolar lungs. Next, coming to the respiratory system of mammals. As mammals are the higher grade organisms and they have a very well developed respiratory system, let us take example of mammalian respiratory system. This is the structure of respiratory system in mammals. It starts with the external nostrils and ends with the alveoli. Now let us discuss in detail about each and every respiratory organ of mammals. Respiratory system starts with external nostrils, nasopharynx, epiglottis, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, alveolar sacs leading into alveoli. These external nostrils are present above the upper lip and open outside. It leads into a nasal passage here. It leads into a nasal passage which leads into a wide chamber called as nasopharynx. It acts as a common passage for food and air. This nasopharynx is a fusion of a nasal region and a pharynx region, so it is called as nasopharynx region, and it acts as a common passage for food and air. This nasopharynx opens through the epiglottis. This epiglottis acts as a lid over glottis, and nasopharynx opens through the epiglottis into a long straight tube called trachea. This is the trachea. This trachea is present through the neck and it extends up to the mid-thoracic cavity. We can see in this diagram. This is the trachea. This trachea extends through the neck and continues till the mid-thoracic cavity. Then the trachea opens into the upper part of the trachea. Beginning of the trachea has a cartilaginous box-like structure called as larynx. This is the larynx. This larynx helps in the production of sound, so it is called as a sound box. And in the mid-thoracic cavity, trachea is divided into two parts, that is right and left bronchi called as primary bronchi. This is divided in the mid-thoracic cavity. And each bronchus divides repeatedly into the secondary bronchi and then leading into tertiary bronchi, which leads into alveolar sacs and alveoli. These lungs together with the alveolar lungs, alveoli, tertiary and primary bronchi are called as constitutes the human lung. This is the structure of alveoli. These are the alveolar sacs and this is a single alveoli. Pleural membrane. In man, each lung is covered by a double layered membrane, that is a pleura. In between, this is a pleural layer. Between each pleural layer is a fluid. This fluid reduces the friction on the lung surface. Now, as a whole, respiratory system is consisting from the external nostrils to the alveoli, and this respiratory structure is divided into conduction part and exchange part, whereas conduction part starts from the external nostrils to the alveoli. And the exchange part includes the alveoli, where the most of the exchange of gases takes place. This exchange part includes from external nostrils, where the exchange of conduction of gases takes place. Conduction part begins with the nostrils and continues through bronchioles. It helps in the transport of atmospheric air, and conduction part not only helps in the transport of atmospheric air. The first part of the respiratory system is the external nostrils, where the hairs are present, which will prevent the entry of dust particles into the air, and it not only prevents the dust particles, but it also humidifies the air which enters into, because we inhale many types of air like cold air or hot air, and it will humidify and warms up the air to the body temperature before delivering it into the lungs. It maintains a balance between the temperature of the air which we inhale and the temperature of the air which is present inside the body. This is the conduction part and this is the exchange part. This is the normal position of a human being. This is a normal posture of a human body, where lungs are in breathing position. This is a respiratory structure present. Two lungs are guarded by the rib cage. This is present in the mid-thoracic cavity. These are the breathing movements when we inhale the air. This is the diaphragm. Diaphragm contracts and we exhale, and when we exhale, diaphragm relaxes. This is the position which we acquire while inhaling and exhaling. This is the side view. Lungs will occupy more space when we inhale the air, so that diaphragm contracts. And the exchange part includes the alveolar sacs, alveoli and the ducts, where the diffusion of gaseous exchange takes place, and this exchange part represents the actual site of respiration, blood and atmospheric air. Structure of alveoli. This alveoli is the structural and functional unit of respiratory system, where the actual exchange of gases takes place. And human lung consists of over 700 million alveoli, which is equal to the area of 70 to 90 square meters, and it is also equal to the size of a tennis court. This alveoli is lined by a thin wall which is consisting of squamous epithelium. This is the structure of alveoli. It is lined by a squamous epithelium. This is the alveolar sac and these are the alveoli. Alveoli on its outer side, it is distributed with the network of capillaries. It consists of a smooth muscle, elastic fibers and the capillaries. As I said, on the outside of alveoli there are network of capillaries. Here we can see in the picture a clear capillaries are distributed on the surface of the alveoli. These capillaries are formed by the splitting of pulmonary artery, which later rejoins and forms the pulmonary vein. And the wall of alveoli also consists of the collagen fibers and elastic fibers. The inner surface of alveoli is always kept moist by a detergent-like substance called as surfactant protein. They are the special types of they are secreted by the special type of cells. These surfactant proteins plays a key role in the respiration, such as they maintain the surface tension of fluid layer and also they reduce the effort needed to inflate lungs during the breathing. These surfactant proteins are of 4 types. They are surfactant protein A, surfactant protein B, surfactant protein C and D. This pulmonary surfactant consists of phospholipids and cholesterol. And the surfactant protein A and D are helpful in the attack and defense of invading bacteria. As we have discussed earlier, when we inhale air, the dust particles are prevented from the entry into the lungs, but some amount of bacteria is entered into the lung. These surfactant proteins are helpful in the defense and they attack the bacteria and prevents lungs from their infection. And surfactant protein B and C form the surfactant film at the air fluid interface that occurs in the alveoli. And surfactant protein B has a critical role in biophysical properties such as I have said, it reduces the surface tension. And coming to the stages of respiration, pulmonary mechanism of pulmonary respiration occurs in 5 stages, that is the pulmonary ventilation or breathing, and external respiration, transport of gases, internal respiration and the cellular respiration. Coming to the first one, breathing or the pulmonary ventilation. This is nothing but the process which we do every day. Breathing is the inhalation of oxygen and exhalation of carbon dioxide. And this breathing represents the first level of exchange of gases between atmosphere and lungs. This breathing includes when we inhale the air which is rich in oxygen content, and this breathing involves two, that is inspiration and expiration. In inspiration, we inhale atmospheric air that is rich in oxygen and that is inhaled into lungs. This happens due to low pressure of air within the lungs. And in expiration, what happens is the air which we inhale is humidified and it is oxygenated, and carbon dioxide which is released is sent out. This occurs when intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. And expiration and inspiration are facilitated or controlled or supported by the contraction and relaxation of diaphragm, as we have learned earlier, and also by the external and internal intercostal muscles. These are present between the rib bones. This is the structure. This is the structure we get when breathing in inhalation takes place. As I have said, diaphragm contracts when we breathe in and diaphragm relaxes when we breathe out. Diaphragm plays a major role in the maintenance of the structure of lungs while inhalation and exhalation takes place. Now coming to the second stage, gaseous exchange. This gaseous exchange involves taking in of oxygen and giving out of carbon dioxide. Actually gaseous exchange takes place in three locations, that is between the gaseous exchange between the atmospheric air and the alveolar air, that is during breathing, and next is the between the alveolar air and the blood capillaries that are present in the lungs, and next is between the blood and the tissues. Gaseous exchange is based on a simple process, that is diffusion. The rate of diffusion depends on it is explained by using a law, that is the relationship relationship that defines that the rate of diffusion between two regions is governed by a relationship that is Fick's law of diffusion, that is R is equal to D into A delta P by D. R stands for rate of diffusion and D is the diffusion constant and A is the area where diffusion takes place and delta P is the difference in the partial pressure and D is the thickness of the membrane where respiration of gases takes place. Now coming to the third state, that is transport of gases. This in transport of gases, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. Respiratory gases are transported majorly through the blood, which acts as a major constituent to transport the carbon dioxide and oxygen. The oxygen diffused into pulmonary blood in this is the oxygen diffused into pulmonary blood in the alveoli. This is transported through heart by the pulmonary veins, and from the heart it is transported and distributed to all the tissues present in the body through the systemic arteries. So the air which we inhale reaches to the alveoli and it again reaches to the heart through pulmonary vein, and it reaches to the different tissues present in the body through the systemic arteries. In the same way, the carbon dioxide which is discharged at cells at tissue level, this is a tissue level, is transported back to heart. In the earlier we have seen that the oxygen which we inhale into the alveoli reaches to heart and it then reaches to the tissue level. Then now here from tissues it again reaches to the heart using systemic veins, and it again reaches to the lungs by the use of pulmonary arteries. Now transport of oxygen. The air, as we have discussed, the air which we inhaled is rich in oxygen content. This oxygen is transported by the blood. Blood cells are the primary blood cells are the red blood cells which contain a respiratory pigment called as haemoglobin, which consists of 4 heme groups and it consists of 4 polypeptide chains, in that 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. Each chain is associated with a heme group which binds to a molecule of oxygen. That means one hemoglobin molecule can combine with 4 molecules of oxygen. This is a molecule of oxygen. This is the molecule of oxygen. This oxygen molecule should be reached to all the tissues present in the body. This happens when we inhale the air through respiration. The inhalation of oxygen takes place and the lungs will supply the oxygen to the alveoli through the blood capillaries. As we have discussed, alveoli is distributed with a network of capillaries on its surface. These capillaries will receive the oxygen through the blood. In this way, oxygen is received by the blood capillaries present on the alveoli. When these oxygen molecules pass through the alveoli, the plasma, the oxygen present in the blood is dissolved by the plasma present in the alveoli. Mostly 98% of the oxygen is dissolved in the alveoli, and the blood contains, as I have said, blood contains a respiratory pigment, that is hemoglobin. This hemoglobin consists of 4 polypeptide chains with a heme group which are having a ferrous molecule which binds to an oxygen molecule in this way. So one hemoglobin molecule can bind to the 4 oxygen molecules. The hemoglobin molecule which are saturated with oxygen are called as saturated hemoglobin, and it is pinkish in color, and the hemoglobin which is unsaturated is dark purplish in color. The hemoglobin which is dissolved in the oxygen which is dissolved in the hemoglobin is transported in the blood capillaries again, and when this dissolved oxygen level increases in the blood capillaries, that is nothing but the partial pressure of oxygen. When the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood capillaries increases, and in the tissues the partial pressure of oxygen will be less, so this oxygen will be transported, the dissolved oxygen will be transported to the tissues in this way. When the amount of partial pressure of oxygen in the tissues increases, the oxygen is released into the surrounding tissues, and in this way oxygen is transported from the blood capillaries to the tissues. And next, coming to the oxygen oxygen transpose. Here is a picture. These are the blood capillaries and this is the surrounding tissue. As I have explained, here we can see the dissolved oxygen content, that is the partial pressure of oxygen is more in the blood capillaries and it is less in the surrounding tissues. So this oxygen is transported to the surrounding tissues, and this is the oxygen dissociation curve. This curve explains about the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and this oxyhemoglobin saturation percentage. As I have discussed, oxygen is transported to the tissues only when the partial pressure of oxygen in the capillaries increases and the partial pressure of oxygen outside the tissues is low. And then coming to the transport of carbon dioxide, the venous blood carries the carbon dioxide to the lungs. Carbon dioxide is mostly transported into the blood in major three forms, that is namely, one is dissolved form and is carbamyl compounds, and the next one is bicarbonate form. In the dissolved form, mostly carbon dioxide is highly soluble in water, and due to its solubility, 7% of carbon dioxide is transported in dissolved form, and it is transported in dissolved form in plasma. Carbamyl compounds. About 23% of carbon dioxide is transported in the form of carbamyl compounds, that is called as carboxyhemoglobin. The carbon dioxide which enters into RBC binds with the amino group present in the RBC, that is the protein which is present in red blood cells, that is hemoglobin contains amino group. That this RBC binds with the amino group of hemoglobin, forming carbamino compounds like carbamyl hemoglobin. So in this way, about 23% of carbon dioxide is transported in the form of carbamino compounds. And when coming to bicarbonate form, most of the amount of carbon dioxide is transported in the form of bicarbonate, that is we can see about 70% of carbon dioxide is transported in the form of bicarbonates by the formation of bicarbonates. This can be explained by the chloride shift or the hamburger phenomenon. This chloride shift explains the transport of oxygen in the form of bicarbonate ions in the blood. Inside the red blood cells, when carbon dioxide enters into the plasma, most of the amount of carbon dioxide enters into the red blood cells, where it reacts with water and forms carbonic acid and hydrogen ions. As the level of bicarbonate ion increases in the erythrocyte, it diffuses into the blood. In order to maintain an electrical balance, the chloride ions which are present in the plasma are shifted or enters into the RBC. And as the chloride is shifting into the RBC to maintain an electrical balance, it is called as chloride shift. It was outlined by Hamburger, so it is also called as Hamburger phenomenon. This is a picture where we can see when carbon dioxide enters into RBC, it reacts with the water and it forms carbonic acid, which dissociates to form bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. As the amount of bicarbonate ions increases in the red blood cells, in order to maintain an electrical balance, these chloride ions which are present in the plasma enters into the RBC. This is shifting of chloride ions takes place, so it is called as chloride shift. As it was framed by Hamburger, it is also called as Hamburger phenomenon. Now coming to the Haldane effect. The amount of carbon dioxide transported by the blood is also influenced by the partial pressure of oxygen. We can say that when partial pressure of oxygen decreases in the blood, then only the dissolved carbon dioxide content increases in the blood. As the definition or the statement comes here as when partial pressure of carbon dioxide is greater in the concentration, the deoxyhemoglobin, the higher will be the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. That is, at any partial pressure of carbon dioxide, if the greater concentration of deoxyhemoglobin is present, then only there will be higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. This phenomenon is called as Haldane effect. Now coming to the cellular respiration. Cellular respiration involves the production of energy from glucose, fatty acids and amino acids. All the metabolic pathways that releases an amount of energy by the breakdown of complex molecules are called as catabolic pathways. Cellular respiration is a most prevalent and it is a most effective one because it releases a more amount of energy which is utilized by the living organisms to perform their activities, because the energy is obtained only when cellular respiration takes place and when energy is released by the cells, and this is possible only when cellular respiration, that is the metabolic pathways, takes place and leads into the release of energy. Cellular respiration, it includes glycolysis, Krebs cycle and the electron transport system. This glycolysis takes place in the cytosol. Glycolysis takes place in the cytosol and the cellular respiration takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria. Krebs cycle is also called as citric acid cycle. Now let us discuss about glycolysis in detail. Glycolysis is the first stage of cellular respiration. This glycolysis occurs in the cytosolic part of the cell. In glycolysis, the glucose which is formed from the food molecules which we intake is converted into the two molecules of pyruvic acid, and this glycolysis may occur both in the presence and absence of oxygen. This is the flow chart of glycolysis where glucose is transformed into the two molecules of pyruvic acid. This glucose is phosphorylated into glucose 6-phosphate and fructose 6-phosphate, and then it is transformed into fructose 1,6-biphosphate, and it is split into dihydroacetone phosphate and also into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. This happens in the presence of fructose hydrogenase aldose, and then it is transformed into 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, and it is again transformed into 3-phosphoglycerate, and then it is transformed into 2-phosphoglycerate in the presence of these enzymes. These enzymes catalyze the reaction, and it is transformed into phospho in the presence of exokinase, and it is transformed into pyruvic acid molecule, where in the glycolysis we can see as a whole as glucose is transformed into two molecules of pyruvic acid. In glycolysis, this is the flow chart of glycolysis. In glycolysis, 2 ATP molecules are produced where 24 kilocalories of energy is released during glycolysis. This energy is in turn utilized by the cells. So as we have discussed, cellular respiration leads to the formation of or release of energy. In the glycolysis we can see 2 ATP molecules are produced, that is 24 kilocalories of energy is produced, which is utilized by the cells to perform their activities. Next, coming to the Krebs cycle. This Krebs cycle is the second stage of cellular respiration, in which pyruvic acid produced in the glycolysis will be completely oxidized to carbon dioxide, and this occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. Some of the steps of glycolysis includes the oxidation and splitting of the molecules and the reduction of the molecules, and here the NADH formed is oxidized by the electron transport chain. This is a citric acid cycle. This is a citric acid cycle where oxaloacetate and acetyl coenzyme A are condensed together to form citrate. In the presence of enzyme, the oxaloacetate and acetyl coenzyme are condensed to form citrate. In the presence of enzyme, citryl coenzyme A. This citrase is again in turn leads into the formation of isocitrate. In the presence of enzyme, isocitrate dehydrogenase. Here we can see the formation of an intermediate product, that is oxalosuccinate. Here NADP is transformed into NADPH, and this isocitrate which is formed will be transformed into 2-oxoglutarate in the presence of the enzyme 2-oxoglutarate carboxylase, and this 2-oxoglutarate will be transformed into succinyl coenzyme A. This succinyl coenzyme A in turn leads into the formation of succinate, and this in turn fumarate, it forms fumarate, and then it forms maltase. In the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, we can see the formation of one GTP molecule. And coming to the electron transport system, this is the third stage of cellular respiration, in which the electron transport chain it happens in the inner mitochondrial membrane. In this, the transfer of electrons takes place from the FADH and NADH to the inner membrane of mitochondrial membrane. This is the diagram of electron transport system. It consists of 4 molecules. This is the first one, this second one, third one, and fourth one. This is how electron transport chain occurs in the inner mitochondrial membrane, leading into the release of ATP synthesis. That is, as we have discussed, cellular respiration leads into the formation of energy which is utilized by the cells. And coming to the so far we have discussed about the respiratory structures involved in different organisms and the functional and structural unit of a mammalian respiratory system, that is alveoli. Now let us look at the oxygen transport. These are the oxygen molecules which will reach to the tissues when we inhale the air. And in the oxygen transport, most of the particular respiratory pigment that is useful is the hemoglobin. This hemoglobin forms oxyhemoglobin, which in turn releases oxygen in the regions of the body, that is to the different tissues and the cells. More amount of oxygen is bound to hemoglobin in the venous blood, and it is called as oxyhemoglobin. Gaseous exchange involves taking in of oxygen and giving out of carbon dioxide, as we have discussed. So this happens between the three locations, that is between atmospheric air and alveolar air during breathing, and between the alveolar air and blood capillaries in lungs, between blood and the tissues. This was stated by the Fick's. This is the Fick's law of diffusion. This states that the rate of diffusion between two regions is depends upon the thickness of the layer where diffusion occurs and the area of the place where exchange of gases takes place. So the relationship comes here as R is equal to D into A into delta P by D, where R stands for rate of diffusion and D is the diffusion constant and A is the area where exchange of gases takes place, and delta P is the difference in the partial pressure of the gases, and D is the thickness of the membrane. Now let us recall the topics discussed. Firstly, we have discussed about the definition of respiration. So the definition of respiration comes as respiration is nothing but the process of obtaining of energy when the food molecules are oxidized. So this respiration can be divided into two types based on whether it takes place in the presence of oxygen or absence of oxygen, that is aerobic and anaerobic respiration. And we have also discussed about the different types of respiratory structures present in invertebrates, that is the lower grade organisms, single cellular organisms. In single cellular organisms, respiration takes place through diffusion, that is exchange of gases takes place through diffusion, and some organisms respire through the skin, that is cutaneous respiration, and some organisms have gills as their respiratory structures, and some organisms such as arthropods, that is cockroach, have tracheal system as their respiratory organs. And then coming to the vertebrates, we have seen that fishes possess gills as their respiratory structures, and mammals have a well developed alveolar lungs. This is the structure of respiratory system in mammals. These lungs are present in the mid-thoracic cavity, and these are externally guarded by the rib cage. This is the structure of diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped structure. This respiratory structure starts with the external nostrils leading into nasopharynx, and this leads into pharynx, larynx and trachea. The beginning part of trachea is called as larynx, and in the mid-thoracic cavity, trachea is divided into two branches, that is left and right. They are called as primary bronchi. This primary bronchi will lead into secondary and tertiary bronchi. leading into alveolar sacs and alveoli. These are the detailed pictures of these are the external nostrils, and this is the, we can see here the nasopharynx region. This is the larynx region, which is present at the beginning of the trachea, and this is the structure of alveolar sac and alveoli. This is the external nostril. As we have discussed earlier, these external nostrils are always kept moist by the production of mucus, as they are surrounded by the mucous membrane in the inner surface, and they also have a hair-like structures which prevents the dust particles to enter into the lungs. And the nasopharynx region opens through a lid-like opening called as epiglottis, which guards the glottis, and this epiglottis leads into a long straight tube-like structure called trachea or windpipe, which passes through the neck and extend up to mid-thoracic cavity. Here we can see a clear pharynx, larynx and trachea. This pharynx leads into a long tube-like structure called trachea. The beginning of trachea is larynx. It is useful in the production of sound, so it is called as the sound box. And here we can see in the mid-thoracic cavity, the trachea is divided into two branches, where it is given into two lungs, where the trachea is divided into two lungs as primary bronchi. Pleural membrane, this is a double layered membrane, and this reduces the friction on the lungs. And as a whole, respiratory system is divided into conduction part and the exchange part. This conduction part begins with the external nostrils to the alveoli, where the conduction of gases takes place. As we inhale, it enters through external nostrils or the nasal passages and enters through the nasopharynx region, and it enters through trachea, which is also called as windpipe, where trachea divides into two branches, that is primary bronchi, which will enter into lungs, and they are further divided. So this conduction takes place from external nostrils to alveoli, so it is called as conduction part. And the exchange part includes the alveolar sacs and the alveoli, where the primary exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place in the alveoli. Here we can see the respiratory movements. When we inhale and exhale, the respiratory movements can be seen like this. When we inhale, this diaphragm contracts, and when we exhale, diaphragm relaxes. This is the posture when we inhale and exhale. And coming to the exchange, when coming to the structure of alveoli, which is a structural and functional unit, in human lung more than 7 million of alveoli are present, and it represents the total surface area of a tennis court. This is a diagrammatic view. These are the capillaries which are distributed on the surface of the alveoli. It consists of elastic fibers and the smooth muscles which are helpful in the reducing of the friction. And coming to the surfactant proteins, these are produced by a special type of cells. The surfactant proteins are helpful in many ways, as it plays key role in the lowering of surface tension, and it also reduces amount of effort needed to inflate lungs. The surfactant proteins are of 4 types: surfactant protein A, B, C and D. These are A and D are useful in attack and defense, and B and C are useful in surfactant film to form the surfactant film at the air fluid interface in the alveoli. And the surfactant protein B is useful in the surfactant including the surface tension. And we can see the mechanism of pulmonary respiration. It is of 5 stages, that is pulmonary ventilation or breathing, and external respiration, transport of gases, internal respiration and cellular respiration. This pulmonary ventilation or breathing is the first stage of exchange, where intake of oxygen and exhalation of carbon dioxide takes place. And next, coming to the external respiration. This external respiration occurs between the alveolar air and the blood capillaries surrounding the alveoli. And Breathing movements we have discussed earlier, and we have seen a video where how the posture comes out as when we inhale and exhale. So we'll discuss now we'll see the gaseous exchange, which is which can be given by a relationship known as a Fick's law of diffusion. And we have also discussed about transport of gases, where transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. The oxygen which is diffused into the alveoli is sent to heart by the pulmonary vein, and then from heart it is sent to different tissues present in the body using the systemic arteries. And in the same way, the carbon dioxide discharged at tissue level is transported back to heart, where it is being transported to the tissues. It is transported back to heart by systemic veins, and from heart to lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Oxygen is transported using the respiratory pigment present, that is called haemoglobin. It consists of 4 heme groups which are of 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. This is the oxygen transport picture where we have seen it, and here the partial pressure of oxygen increases, and the surrounding tissues have the lesser amount of partial pressure of oxygen. So the oxygen which is dissolved in the capillaries is sent through the tissues. This is how oxygen is transported to the different tissues, and this is the oxygen dissociation curve. Transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is transported in 3 forms, as we have discussed earlier. One is in the dissolved form, another is by carbamyl compounds, and another one is by the formation of bicarbonates. In the dissolved form, only 7% of carbon dioxide is transported, and as a carbamyl compounds, 23% of carbon dioxide is transported, and by bicarbonate, 70% of carbon dioxide is transported. And it is explained by chlorine shift. And we have also discussed about the cellular respiration, which includes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport system. And so far I have discussed about the definition of respiration, respiratory structures involved in mammals, and the different respiratory organs present in different organisms, and the gaseous exchange, that is the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the cellular respiration, which included glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport system. Thank you. Thank you, TSAT, for giving me this opportunity.